Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is Gabby Veglio, and I'm one of the assistant head teachers at the Kingston Academy. So I hope in the last couple of minutes you've had a chance to think about the two questions that are currently on the screen. And when I've delivered this session to staff at various schools before, guesses for that first question has ranged from 20 questions per lesson to 75 questions per lesson. And at Tiffin Girls, actually, one teacher had actually done this experiment where when they were doing a lesson observation, they counted the number of questions that the teacher asked, and it was about, I think it was 71. So we know that questioning is a big part of what we do, but I think the sophistication of our questions can vary. And a good starting point is to consider why we're asking these questions. So some of the reasons that I thought of are on the screen. I'm sure we would all agree checking for understanding is a big reason. But also sometimes it can just be to check that pupils are engaged and that they're focused, or to prompt further thinking, whether that's because they need some scaffolding or because you need to stretch them and inspire further thinking. One of Tom Sherrington's blogs focuses on 3 types of questioning in particular: cold calling, think, pair, share, and then checking for understanding. So cold calling allows for recall practice, as well as going beyond that surface level knowledge. It could just be surface level knowledge, but it also ensures that pupils are thinking a bit deeper, and you can target your questioning and level your questioning as necessary. It also allows for pupils to, make sure that they are interacting within the lesson. And then checking for understanding, of course, means we're trying to find out what pupils know, but also what they don't know, perhaps more importantly. And then think, pair, share offers an inclusive but also challenging activity where everybody in the class is involved at the same time. And it lowers the stakes compared to cold calling, and pupils are able to rehearse their answers before feeding back to the whole class. So Tom explains that these 3 types of questioning certainly go hand in hand together, and lessons are most effective when they are used all together to move the learning forward. So let's take them one by one and think a little bit further for anyone who's not familiar with these types of questioning. So cold calling means that the teacher will decide who they're going to ask a question to without pupils volunteering at all. So this means that pupils can truly practice quality first teaching by picking their priority pupils, or pupils that they think may be a good barometer to sort of understand whether the whole class in general are progressing and are understanding or not. You can also practice targeted leveled questioning and bounce questions around the room so that several people do have a chance to be involved. It's important that if a pupil doesn't answer, if they say I don't know, or if they answer incorrectly, that we come back to them and follow up to ensure that they remain included, and that we don't allow that opt-out environment. And pupils will then get used to that no opt-out culture where there's some accountability and they know that they have to be listening carefully in order to think and be ready to provide a verbal answer at some point in the lesson. All of these questioning techniques as well allow pupils to practice their oracy skills and techniques, which I know many schools at the moment are prioritising since COVID and remote learning, now that we're back in school and able to talk to each other face to face. So think, pair, share is where you pose a question to the group, allow thinking time for pupils to think about their own answer independently, and then share their ideas with their partner before feeding back as a whole class. So one of the biggest benefits is that teachers will actually, if you're specifically using this model, then teachers will actually leave enough thinking time after posing a question. And you could allow pupils to write down their ideas during that independent time. But I think that when we're asking questions normally, we often don't leave enough thinking time for pupils, or certainly not every pupil, to really structure a proper answer in their heads. So by specifically using this model, it means that everybody has that better chance of thinking through an idea properly. And then the fact that they can share with a partner and enable them to sort of test out their answer and also see what someone else thinks of their idea and hear their idea, that makes the next bit less scary when they have to share then with the wider group. So they can rehearse and they can see whether they were on track or not. So I really believe that when pupils have to actually verbalise their ideas with their pair and then with the class, and have to actually articulate some explanation, it really makes them have to think through the sequencing of their ideas, as well as uncovering some gaps in their knowledge, often, definitely. I think it's important that pupils have a goal and a time limit to pace themselves during that think and pair parts of the process. And then we as teachers and teaching assistants can circulate the room, listening to the ideas during that pair discussion, and contribute some direction if it's necessary. So lastly, the checking for understanding is what most questions in the classroom are used for, I think. This can include cold calling and think, pair, share. And it's important that questioning occurs after every new piece of information, testing that the class are sort of with you before moving on to the next step. It's often difficult not to assume some knowledge and, skip a few steps when teaching certain topics, perhaps. And so it helps to plan questions in advance, definitely, when you're planning a lesson, so that you can think about how you're going to guide their thinking and also explore potential answers that they might give you, that the students might give. Okay, so now we've got time for a 2-minute activity. I've put several questions on the screen. Some of the questions you might find yourself asking your classes very often. And some of the questions on here you might think are not particularly helpful, actually, or effective for learning. But I'd like you to think about whether each question lends itself to cold calling, or whether it would be a good one to do think, pair, share, or if it is just checking for understanding, or perhaps none of the above. So if you are sat with a colleague, it'd be interesting to see if you agree with each other. But if not, I think it's still a useful exercise to categorize these questions into how you would use questioning to ask them. Okay, so 2-minute timer. In fact, I think I'll change it to a 1-minute timer if possible. There we go. 1 minute is up on the screen. Oh, classic, on mute, oh dear. I wonder if you spotted the questions that I was referring to before about perhaps not being particularly beneficial for the learning, and which questions, for example, what's the same and what's different about these problems, or which of these two options is better and why. And those broader questions, more open questions, certainly would lend themselves to think, pair, share, and then that could result in some much better answers and better outcomes for lots of pupils in the room if you were able to use the think, pair, share model. So anyway, I hope the session has given you some food for thought.